Hey, hello, and good morning or good afternoon. It depends or where you are. Okay, I am Ettore Volpicelli, developer marketing for our region, EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Welcome again to our series of events dedicated to developers. Okay, we trust on you. And we strongly believe that you have really a very important role in the society that we are living, or the time that we are living on. So today we are going to have a walkthrough on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Core Services. We have two great hosts today with me, Tim Graves and Sid Yoshi. They will drive you on the lab that we are going to perform together and to support you, especially. So please, if you are going ahead and you want to raise question, please use the chat, okay? In case, if necessary, Sid will be able also to get a breakout room with you for a one-to-one support session. So before to start, just a spot, we are going to have the next big conference for our developer community on August the 5th. So I really encourage you to check the agenda. It will be all around simplified modern application development with around 8 talks, a panel, and 4 hands-on lab, live hands-on lab, like this one actually. So please check the agenda. I will share during the day the link in chat, so you can get the page and probably register. So now it's the moment to work. So Tim, good morning. How are you? You are on mute.
My apologies, I am on mute. Good morning, Ettore.
Good morning.
The joys of technology. I haven't had enough coffee. I'm all right, thank you very much.
I will be in chat, supporting the guys here, our guest, and giving a hand to Sid. And you will be our lead instructor today. So it's all yours, the scene. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everybody. So good morning, depending on your time zone, I guess maybe good afternoon. So hopefully I can convince our wonderful technology here to cooperate. So can you see the slides, please, folks? As I said, is that showing?
I have still my screen, I think.
Okay. Sid?
No, you need to show your screen.
Okay. Right, the joys of technology. I'm still getting used to this, as I say.
Perfect.
Okay, let's have another go. Right, okay. So can we see the slides now?
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay. Obviously, as anybody who's ever seen anything from Oracle knows, we have to put up our legal safe harbor statement. I should say that as far as I'm aware, there's nothing in this presentation that would be considered future-looking technologies, because we're all going to be using stuff that is alive today. Okay. So just to briefly introduce ourselves. So Sid and I, we are what is officially called Solution Directors in the EMEA OCI Center of Excellence. That means that we're technical specialists. I work in the area of cloud native open source solutions and some of our developer tools. And Sid works in the area of application development. But we're not just that. Also, Sid is a tech enthusiast, cricket fan, Formula One fan, and I think a bit of an international man of mystery, judging by his choice in cars. My name is Tim Graves. I am an unprofessional chef, which means I produce things that are probably nice for you, but maybe pretty unhealthy. And I'm a keen skier. So what are we going to do today? Well, the first thing we'd like to understand is what experience you have with the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So if you could briefly just answer yes or no, explaining if you are new to the OCI infrastructure, just so that we have a bit of a background on what the skill sets are that we have here. Okay. Right, thank you very much indeed, everybody. So it looks like about 2/3 of you have not had any major prior experience with the OCI infrastructure. About a third of you have. Okay, that's absolutely fine. So next step, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. And in particular, I need you to do a couple of things. We're going to be using a free tier trial, okay? And to get access to that, we'll show you what you need in a moment. But please, if you have not already signed up for this event, this is the sign up link, bit.ly/Oracle free tier 24th June, okay? You will need a Oracle account to be able to do this, and this is an Oracle tenancy account. We're shortly going to be doing the lab itself, and the lab itself, you can see, is at this address here, bit.ly devlab OCI 24th of June, and I think that should also be in the chat. If we could just put that in there as well, please, Ete. So if you need to access these links again, please go back to the chat. Okay. Now, to do this lab itself, you are going to need a computer, which I'm guessing you probably already have, with a working internet connection and a web browser, and of course, an interest in learning. This is an entirely web-based lab. You don't need to run anything on your laptop. You can if you want to, but you can run this all completely through the web. Okay. So what are we going to be doing here, and how are we going to be doing it? Well, what we're going to be doing, unlike some of the other developer sessions that you may have seen us do in the past, where we've operated using breakout rooms, we're trying a different approach today. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be providing support to the sessions by chat. But we're going to effectively be doing a short explanation of the step that we're about to do, and I'm going to call it demo along. Okay, so basically I'm going to do the step, and please feel free to literally follow this as I go. I'll be going things fairly slowly there, and then we'll give you a couple of minutes just to make sure that you've completed all of those steps. Now, we would like to run just one more poll here, which is to understand how far you have got in the pre-work. Now, for those of you who have signed up in advance, we have sent you an email inviting you to create the trial tenancy account before. So if you have done that, please could you let us know? If you haven't, that's fine. We will walk you through that, but it just helps us balance the time balance there. Okay. Okay. Great, thank you. So it looks like some of you have done a pre-work, but a number of you haven't. So, right. What we're going to be doing here then is we will explain to you the steps that we're going to do in the lab, and then we'll start going through on the create tenancy. For those of you who have not registered for your trial account, the link was put into the chat from Etere. It was the 37 minutes past the hour link. Please make sure that you have created that account. Okay, so what we're going to do today, we're going to look at how to create your tenancy. Obviously, that's pretty important. You need an environment to work with. We're going to look at how you can use the OCI Shell, how we generate SSH keys within the OCI Shell, and then we're going to start looking at the services and features available in terms of resources within the OCI environment. Specifically, we're going to show you how to create compartments, users, groups, and policies. So this is all almost on the governance side of things, and it's how you can control who can do stuff within your OCI environment. We're then going to start creating the actual resources. So we're going to create a virtual cloud network. That's effectively a private network to you, but your resources are going to sit on. We're going to create a compute instance within that network and show how to connect to that. And then we're going to install a web server within that. We're then going to look at creating block volumes, because quite often people want to use external storage rather than just the boot disk of their instance. And we're going to look at how to use object storage. But first of all, we need to create a tenancy. Now, this is the one bit that I can't show you live because I've already done this. So what we did is we got a bunch of screen images for you to show you. So first of all, if you have registered, you will have got a link and you will have been given in that link, it will say cloud.oracle.com. please can you go to cloud.oracle.com in your web browser now? Okay. Now, once you have got there, you will see on the left-hand side a little box area that looks a little bit like this. And you will need to click the Not an Oracle Cloud Customer Yet, please sign up on the Sign Up button there. That will take you to a form. Now, we have, as part of the sign up, we've already kind of pre-registered you. So the sequence we're going to be showing here is slightly different from the one you would normally see if you hadn't been pre-registered. But you need to fill in the basic account information. So your country and territory, first, last name, and the email address. It is very, very important that you use the email address that you use to sign up for this session, because we have pre-registered that email address in the system. That means you don't need to provide any credit card information to gain access to an account. It also means you're going to get a larger amount of credits to use. So if you can fill in that account information form, please. As I say, very important that you use the email address that you use to register for today's session. Okay, once you've done that, please click the Verify Email or Continue button just below the email box, and you will probably be provided with a screen that talks about a special offer. Now, this is specific to today's session, and you'll need to select that. Basically, that gives you the extra credits that I just mentioned. So click the button marked Select Offer, please. Once you've done that, you will probably need to complete the video capture. And you're going to need to fill in a form. You will have to fill in, oops, sorry, wrong slide. You will have to fill in a username and password, okay? The username will be based on your email address, okay? And the password rules, it's got to be at least one uppercase letter, at least one lowercase letter, one number, and at least one special character. For example, underscore or something like that, okay? It is vitally important that you do remember the username, which is the email address, and the password that you have chosen here. You'll get a page that looks something like that, okay, once you fill that in. Okay. Now, the next stage, once you have done this, is you will be asked to supply address information. Now, just to be clear, we're not going to be generating any bills for you here. At the end of 30 days, or when you finish using the credit, this tenancy will revert to what's called an always free tenancy. That means as long as you are using it, and that's logging in on a fairly regular basis, you will be able to use some basic services for free forever. That includes some basic compute services, a small database, and a number of other features. It's also important that you provide a mobile number, okay? So you'll need to choose your country code and then the mobile number that you have. And then once you've done that, please click Continue.
Hey, Tim, just
Yep.
to clarify, with the special offer that we are giving today, if they are using the same email address, they don't need to insert both credit card and run
Correct.
also this SMS validation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this step should be not necessary
no,
for our guest today.
Yeah, it
the
will
live
require
guest of today. Yeah.
Yeah, it will require a mobile number to get onto the next stage of a form, unfortunately. Okay, but as Ezra says, you won't need to provide a credit card or anything like that. Okay, so once you've got through that page, it will log you in to your OCI account. Now, just to walk you through the process, if at a later stage you want to log back into the OCI account, and we hope you will, if you go to cloud.oracle.com and enter your account name, now that's the one you got on an earlier page, so this is your account or tenancy name in the cloud account box, then you click the next button. If you are prompted for an identity provider, make sure that you choose the Oracle Identity Cloud Service and then click continue. Excuse me. And then enter your credentials that you set up on the earlier forms, for example, your username and the password that you chose. Okay. And that will bring you into the OCI environment, which should look like the window you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. Now, if you have not got to this stage, we're going to give you a minute or two just to get to this stage. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the lab instructions, and under Getting Started, if you weren't able to keep up, there are steps for going and creating a free trial account. Just be aware that these steps ask for things like credit cards and so on, but if you're using the email address you signed up for today's session, you do not need to provide, because this is a more general lab description that we're talking about for all of our customers. So I'm just going to quickly launch a poll. Etre, can you put a poll up just asking for, so we can track if people have completed that free tier sign up, please? Thank you. So once you have completed the free tier sign up and you have access to the cloud account window, which is one that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, if you can just show us that, that would be appreciated. And I see some people have actually started getting a little bit further advanced and are on to the next step. That's fine. Okay. So we'll just give you a minute or two just to complete that process then. So it looks like about half of you have finished that sign-up process. Okay, so hopefully now what you've got is on the, you can see a screen that looks similar to the one you can see on the right-hand side here, okay? If you logged out or something, just go back to cloud.oracle.com and sign back in, all right? So next step we're going to do is we're going to be doing some work using the OCI Cloud Shell. Now, the OCI Cloud Shell is a very, very useful tool. And it is basically providing you with a simple and easy way to run commands. Now, to be clear, you can run OCI commands from your local laptop. You'll need to download the OCI runtime environment, and you will need to set up your credentials within that environment. Now, that can take a bit of time, okay? It's not a problem, obviously, but it's not an instant thing. So what we've done is we have provided the OCI Cloud Shell. Now, this is basically a Linux command environment, but within that environment, it's automatically set up your credentials based on the user you logged in as. So this makes life a lot easier. I would just say I have had some problems running this since a recent Chrome update in the incognito mode in Chrome. It works fine with Safari and Firefox. As a Mac user, I'm not sure, I don't know how to test it on the Windows environments. But generally speaking, this is a very, very highly recommended tool. So to get to the OCI Cloud Shell, on the right-hand window, I'm just going to be showing this, there is a little box called Cloud Shell, just next to where it says the region that you have chosen. If you click that box, come on, you will see at the bottom of the screen, we get a little pop-up area, okay? And it will say something like creating Cloud Shell, creating or attaching to your home directory, okay? Now, this can take a minute, sometimes longer, if you have been using this a lot and you've got a lot of information in your home directory, okay? We are working on speeding this process up. And hopefully, it will bring mine up shortly. Okay, there we go. Okay, so as I say, can we see that? Is that showing easily? Does that?
You need to zoom in a bit. You need to zoom in a bit.
Is that easier? Is that better?
That's much better.
Okay, right. So within this OCI Cloud Shell, you can run a whole bunch of commands, for example, ls and the traditional Unix commands. So I just have to try and work out getting the right balance between that and the visuals. Well, we'll see how that works. Now, the Cloud Shell, you can manage the Cloud Shell. You see there's a little horizontal bar that will minimize it. The double arrow will maximize it and make it larger. And you can then shrink it back down using that arrow. So fairly typical icons that you'd expect to see on Windows in most computers. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use the OCI Cloud Shell to generate SSH keys. Now, why are we using SSH? Well, there's a couple of reasons for this. We want to have secure access to the compute instances that we create. And SSH actually stands for Secure Shell. Okay, it is an industry standard technology. I'm pretty sure that most of you will have come across this before. And there are clients available for pretty much every environment, including a client that is built into the Cloud Shell environment, which is what we will be using later. One point, when you are looking at the keys that we'll be generating in a minute, never ever use commands like more. Always use the cat command. This is because commands like more and page and stuff like that can put new lines in, and those can effectively break up the key that you're looking at, which is a bit of a problem because it then means it doesn't work. So what are we going to do? Well, let's go and follow the instructions. So we are going to create a Cloud Shell environment, which is in this case already running here. If I click this About Cloud Shell item, it will expand. And we're going to create a directory for SSH. So if you see here where it's got this step 2, mkdir SSH, there is a button here marked copy. If you click copy, it just copies it to the text board, so you can then paste that into the Cloud Shell environment. Okay. Now, in my case, I've already got that directory existing, but if you can create that directory, and then what we're going to do is the next step down is to switch to that directory and to copy, or rather to create a SSH key. Okay. Now, when you are creating the key pair, if it asks you for a passphrase, just press return. Okay, and you'll need to press return a second time, right? It's basically, this is an extra security measure to secure the keys. We're not going to use it today. Obviously, in a production environment, you would probably want to do that. So that's created the keys. If we type ls, we can see that we have a couple of files here. We've got one called Cloud Shell key, one called cloudshell.pub, and a directory called known hosts. The known host directory may not appear in your environment until you've started actually issuing the SSH command. Okay. So the key that we will generally be using is this one here, cloudshellkey.pub. Okay. So if I cat that file, you will see the key we have here. All right. So this is basically an SSH key. It uses RSA, which is a fairly well-known encryption standard. Please, when you are asked to copy and paste it, do everything from where it starts saying SSH all the way down to the bit here, and it's got what almost looks like a bit of an email address at the bottom. Okay, so that's the entire thing, right? It is very important, as I say, that you use cat to view that, because otherwise it might put in some unexpected new lines. So we're going to give you a minute or two just to create those Cloud Shell public and private keys. Today, could you launch the poll? And people, once you've created those keys, could you do that in that poll? Actually, I can relaunch the poll, can't I? Here we go. Let's try that. Okay. So once you have generated your SSH keys, please could you mark that on the list? Okay, excellent. So it looks like most of you have successfully generated those keys. We'll just give you a minute just for everybody else to catch up. For those of you who are still having problems or are still going through the free tier sign up, if you are having problems with that, please use the chat window to send a message to Etere or Sid, and they will be able to help you using the chat window. Okay. Okay. Right. It looks like most people have successfully generated the SSH keys. Excellent. Okay, so now we've got our SSH keys. We're going to just put those to one side for a minute, because what we're going to do is we're going to start creating a little bit of a governance framework. So Maxim, the command for generating the SSH key is shown once you go into the lab documentation on the left-hand side. You can see this window, and it is this one here. It should be seen in the lab documentation. Okay. Right. So what do we do with OCI in terms of governance and management? It's not like a big bucket that everybody gets to play in. This is designed for enterprise level workloads and productions. And in a commercial enterprise, you don't have a big bucket that everybody gets to play in. Okay. Everybody gets generally allocated specific sections of this environment for specific projects. And what we're going to do is we're going to use tooling within OCI to help do that. So if I click this, just to explain what a compartment is. So basically, a compartment is a way to separate resources within the Oracle Cloud environment. And that is the kind of thing that enterprises really, really like. Okay. Now, just to be clear, if you're just doing this yourself just to play with, you can use the default compartment, which is the root compartment. It's automatically created for you. But if you were doing this in any kind of a production environment, you would want to use compartments to separate the resources. And that gives you a degree of control that you just don't get by putting everything into the same compartment. So you can, for example, specify individual users who have individual rights to specific compartments. Okay, you can apply resource limits to a compartment to stop somebody taking all of your compute environment over. Also, you can get billing information on a compartment basis. Now, compartments are hierarchical, kind of like directories. So if your organization structure works that way, you could have like a top level compartment separating things by major department. And then you could have a compartment within that for each of the sections in the top level department. Obviously, some people separate on that basis. Other people separate more on a functional basis. For example, projects and stuff like that. We don't actually care. We provide you with the tooling to let you choose whichever you wish to do. Okay, so let's now go back and have a look. Oops, sorry, wrong button. Let's now go back and have a look at how to create a compartment. So on the lab text window, you can see this on the left-hand side of the screen. This is in the identity and access management section. So when you're about to do that, if you can click that section, please. Okay. And then if you scroll down to where it says creating compartments. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow the instructions here and explain a bit about them. So within your OCI window, we need to go to the compartment selector. Now, because this screen is, obviously I've zoomed it up to make it visible, I'm just going to shrink the Cloud Shell down for now. So I'm just going to minimize it. So I'm going to click the hamburger menu on the top left. Now, unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, we changed the visuals on here, and we haven't managed to catch up with all of our lab images. So you may find things look very slightly different. But if you click Identity and Security in the top level of the left menu, and then you will be able to click Compartments. Now, if you wish to, if you just started typing compartment, in the search box, it will go directly to there as well. Okay, so that's another way of getting access to it. Right. So this is the compartments window, and what we're going to do now is we're going to create a compartment. So we're going to name it Demo. Now you do have to provide a description. Okay, it gets a little bit upset if you don't. Now, we're not going to make use of this today, but I just wanted to also mention every resource in OCI has the ability to be what's called tags. Okay, so you can put tags on anything. Effectively, you provide a name and a value, and then you can do things like searching and tracking what's happening based on those names and values. Right? Why would you do this? You would probably do this because you wanted to maybe have some kind of matrix-based understanding of what's happening in your environment. It could also be that you have administrators who work across multiple compartments and you want to track which administrator has done what. There's a whole bunch of automation that you can do about tagging, including things like automatically applying a tag based on the user who created something. But for now, we're not going to do that. We're just going to click Create Compartment, and that will create a demo compartment for us. Now, creating a compartment is something that applies across all of OCI. Now, in my particular case, you can see here at the top of the screen, it says Germany Central Frankfurt. That means that the region I chose to run this demo was our Frankfurt data center. If you click the drop down and then click to manage regions, please don't do this now. But if you did do that, you would have the ability to access a huge list of available regions. And what happens is when we create a compartment, that compartment is created in every single data center. So it takes a little bit of time to get to all of those environments. Okay. Now you can see now here that the compartment has been created, and it says that I have a compartment called Demo. So I'm just going to give everybody a minute to access the use of Demo, or to create their demo compartment. Okay. So once that compartment has been created, if you want to, you can click the name to see the details of a compartment, and you obviously have the ability to run things like rename it and so on. But this is the compartment we're going to be doing all of the work in this lab. Okay. So the next thing we need to do, now we've got a workspace to work in, is we're going to create a user. Now, this is really just to show you the process of creating a user. It's quite a complex policy-driven mechanism if you wanted to set this up in a real production environment, because you may have many different types of users with many different types of abilities and roles and so on. We're going to show you the basics of the process, but the specifics of exactly how you configure people are going to be unique to your environment. So what we're going to do here is to show you the basics of this process. So I'm going to, in the lab instructions, follow the instructions in step 2, managing users. Now, first of all, a user is a human being, but a user doesn't have control rights themselves. Those rights come from the groups they're associated with and the policies that are applied to those groups. So let's go and have a look at, first of all, how to create a group. So if I click the hamburger menu, and I'm going to take a shortcut here, so I'm just going to start typing groups. Okay, and choose the groups that comes under identity. Right? If you wanted to, you could click identity and security and then groups. Okay, it ends up at the same place. Okay, so by default, we created an administrator group. The user that you created when you created your OCI tenancy is automatically added. And members of the administrators group can basically do anything in any compartment. But we want to show how we could restrict users to doing things in a particular compartment. So we're just going to click the create group button here. Okay, and we're going to give it a name. I'm going to use OCI group. Okay, just purely because a lot of the copy and paste stuff that you'll see in the lab instructions is based on that. Okay, so it just makes life a little bit easier. And again, I'm going to give it a description. Okay, you of course can change the name if you wish, and obviously in your real world environments, that is definitely what you would do. But we're just going to use that for now. So I'm just going to create that group. Now, again, this is a worldwide resource that's just being created. Okay. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to give that group administrative rights. What we're going to do is we're going to say members of that group can do whatever they want, but only in that compartment. Now, there are rules about how policies and group membership works when we create a user. But basically, these are additive, right? And it works on a principle of least privilege. So you have the minimum set of rights based on the policies and the groups that you have. So I'm now going to just click on identity and go to policies. Okay. And I'm going to click create policy. Okay. Now, again, we need to give it a name. Okay. And we'll give it a description as well. Oops, my apologies. I hit shift lock there. Right, okay. Now we need to choose the compartment that this group is going to run in, okay? So in this case, we're just going to choose OCI and then demo, all right? Now, again, this is an example where we have a slight change in the user interface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the instruction from there, actually, and you can see here I've got a manual policy editor. Okay, so you need to choose a manual policy editor. If you want to, there are pretty standard policies that do a number of things. So, you know, for example, let members of your auditor group inspect resources and stuff like that. But here we're going to choose the manual policy editor, and we're just going to paste that set of controls in. Okay, so that has created a group policy, all right? Now, lastly, what we need to do is we're going to create a user. Now, the user is obviously somebody who can log in, okay? So if I go back to the identity and choose users, in fact, it's already chose that. So there are various types of user here. We're going to create effectively a local user. For those of you who are familiar with Unix users, this is effectively the equivalent of an entry in etc password as opposed to some kind of namespace user, okay? So we're going to give this user a name. So we're going to, just for now, I'm just going to call them demo user. Okay. We're going to give them, you need to give it an email address. Oh, sorry, apologies. First of all, please make sure you choose where it says IAM user. Okay. That's important because that's the local user. So demo user. Okay. You don't have to provide an email if you don't want to. All right. So click create user, making sure that you have chosen IAM user. Okay. So that's gone and created our user. Now, what I'm going to do is I am going to create a password for that user. And like a good little person, I am going to violate the security policy because I am going to store that password in a text file, which I know you shouldn't do, but trust me, when you see these passwords, you'll see why I am doing that. Okay, right. So create reset password. Okay, obviously you've got multiple factor authentication and so on, and there are a number of options. I'm going to just create a one-time password for that particular user, just to show you it's a particularly messy, complicated password. Okay, so if you click the copy button there, it will copy it into your copy and paste. Now I am just going to save that away in my text edit. In a production environment, you would then email that to a user. There is support for automation so that you can create lots of users in one go, and the scripting and so on to do that as well. Now, what I'm going to do next is I am going to use, in this case, I'm going to use Safari because I'm running on a Mac. I'm creating a private window. Okay, purely just because I want to ensure that I keep any entries that I put in here separate so that they don't get overridden or they don't override any other settings I've got here. So just to show you how this works, if I go to cloud.oracle.com, okay, yep, I accept cookies, so I need to give it the account name. Okay. Now, in this particular case, I need to choose infrastructure direct sign-in because we're using the local account details, right? So the name and the password that I generated earlier. Okay. Now, I am being told I have to change my password because that password is generated as a one-time password. So, okay. Right, so that will change the password and it will then log that user in. Okay, so we've now created the user. We have successfully logged in on that user. Now, what we have done here is created somebody, but they actually don't have any permissions. So for example, if I go into compute and look at compute instances, right, they won't be able to create a compute instance. So I need to choose the compartment. You can see they don't even have multiple compartments here, okay? The point being that this user exists, but they don't have any administration rights. So what we need to do is we need to assign that user to the group that has administration rights. So if we go back to our control window here, I know we're doing quite a lot of steps. We're going to give you a few minutes just to catch up on this shortly. And if I go to the groups here for that user, I can add the user to a group, right? And that will appear in the demos list. So it now says OCI group, and then I've now added that user. Okay. Now we can, it will sort of dynamically add itself and bring things in later on. But for now, what we're just going to do is just going to show you that we'll log out and then we'll log back in again. And at that point, that user should have full rights to.
It already had, Tim. It showed that it can create instance. It showed the user dynamically updated.
So. Okay, thank you. Right, so well, let me just go back in. Hopefully I can remember the password I set. Okay. So let's go in back to the compute instances. Okay. And I now need to choose the compartment demo because we created that in demo. And now you can see that Although I couldn't do anything in the top level compartment, I can do stuff in the demo compartment. So we're going to give you a couple of minutes to do this. Please do remember to look at this other user in a separate account or a separate web browser private window. Okay. So we're going to give you a minute or two just to catch up on that demo. I appreciate it was a lot of stuff that we talked about there. So I'm just going to relaunch the poll. Once you have gone through that and created your user, please just confirm that under the identity and access management that you've successfully done that. Okay, regarding the question about importing users from a CSV file, Active Directory, and so on, yes, for our abilities to do this, I'm not going to go through that today because I don't have all of the examples and setups, but certainly if that's something that you want to do, we can get more of a discussion on that, but that's done through the identity service rather than here. If you are, for example, working with Active Directory, you can actually set up a federation so that you can effectively maintain your existing Active Directory infrastructure and just link that into this environment. We would generally recommend that if you do have another identity provider that you are already using, that you would probably want to stick with that and that use a federated identity. You could, of course, switch to our identity service. So we have a identity and access management service and the identity cloud service, but would let you provide federation out to other users there as well. Okay, so right, it looks on the documentation here on the poll as if most people have got close to the end of the identity. We'll just give you one more minute on that. As Ettore says, please do remember, this is not a race. You will have access to this cloud environment for another 30 days, okay? The lab documentation is going to be available to you throughout that period. So, obviously, if you are, working on this and you want to come back to it later, that's absolutely fine, right? That's something that you'll be able to do. Okay.
For the folks who are stuck on pre-rack and free tier sign up, please reach out to me and Ettore if you need any help, so we can iron out any issues you might be facing. Thank you.
Okay, to the person who was asking about importing user and Active Directory information, I don't have any details. If you could put your email address in a direct message to me in the chat, I will get information and send it to you after the event. I'm afraid all I have is just something that says guest. Okay, right. So I think most of you, by the looks of it, have successfully got to the stage of creating a user and so on. Okay, so let's just quickly review what some of the stuff that was happening there. So first of all, we created a compartment. And a compartment, like a directory in a file system, is an administration point. It's a way of separating security and control details. Then we created a policy. Now, a policy defines what a group can do. Policies can apply to the entire tenancy, or they can apply to a specific compartment. And if a compartment is part of a hierarchy, it's that compartment and that point downwards. Now, we do have a set of standard policies, for example, to allow people in administration, an audit group, for example, to look at things. We also have the advanced editor, which allows you to give much more fine-grained control. In practical terms, if you were setting up a hierarchy of compartments and separating things by department, for example, you would use groups to identify the users that are in each compartment. And you would then, or you would use groups on a per compartment basis. And you would have policies for that group that applied to that specific compartment. Members of the administration group, however, do have full administration rights across the entire tenancy. So you do want to limit members of that group where you can. Please remember that the admin group is basically the individual who created the tenancy to start with, although you can, of course, create other users and add them to that admin group. And we would recommend that you do at least have 2 members of the admin group, just in case somebody forgets their password or leaves the company. We then created a user. So users are individuals. As you saw, we can create a user, we can log them in. We can assign a user to a group, and they don't have to be in a group, but they can't really do anything if they're not. And those groups have administration rights based on the policies that are effectively assigning rights to those groups. So the user we created today was an IAM user. Okay. Now, as you may have heard me mentioning, we have the ability to do federation. It's a lot more powerful. But from a demo perspective, it takes a lot longer. Okay. Now, once we've created a user, we need to assign them into a group because that's effectively the way they're going to inherit those policies. Now, obviously, when you do create a user, it is really important that you know who they are and that you take that one-time password to obviously pass that to the user. You can only get that one-time password when you create it or reset it, although you can create or reset the password multiple times. So what we're going to look at next is we've gone away from sort of the administration and the governance section. What we're going to start looking at next is how we can create resources within the OCI environment. Specifically, we're going to start by creating a virtual cloud network. Now, a virtual cloud network is basically a network. It is a separate network. Each of the VCNs is completely separate unless you set up connections between them, okay? And you can only set up connections between the ones that are in your tenancy. So there's a lot of security that comes into place here. A VCN basically allows you to define things like address ranges and subnets. You can specify security rules. It's called a security list that detail what access is allowed. You also specify routing details. Now, every subnet within a VCN effectively has automatic routing to every other subnet under the control of the security rules. And you can also then start creating network-based resources, for example, a compute instance or a load balancer on the VCN. Now, as I said, the VCNs do have access controls. You can have a public or a private subnet. Now, a private subnet only has or is only accessible from within the VCN itself. So basically, you have to access the environment, and then you can start accessing those services. So generally speaking, most people have one or more items that are on a public subnet if they're providing external services, for example, if they're providing a web server and so on. Now, critically, the entire environment is basically blocked except for SSH access. So we work on the principle that you have to enable the services you want to have access. You don't get access by default except for SSH accesses to the instances. Okay, so let's have a look at how we would go and do that. Excuse me, not to me, my eye there. Okay, so on the left side of the window, you can see this is the virtual cloud shell window. Sorry, not the cloud shell window, the virtual cloud networks window. Okay, I'm going to click this. You may get a warning about your cloud shell window dropping. After about 20 minutes, it will drop. If you do, just click reconnect for now. Okay, and that will reset the session. Okay, so first of all, we need to create a VCN. Now, please do this as the user that you originally logged in as, not as the user that we just created. So the VCN, if we click the hamburger menu and then go to networking and then go to virtual cloud networks. Okay. So we're going to use the VCN wizard to create a VCN. Now we could do this by hand. it's a little bit easier to use the VCN window. It'll set some stuff up for you automatically rather than you having to create all of the individual items to start with. Once you've created it using the VCN wizard, you can, of course, go back in and edit it later. So let's just shrink the Cloud Shell window down a bit. So start VCN window. Okay. We're going to create a new VCN. So this is the top option here. Okay. So we're going to give it a couple of pieces of information. So we're going to give it a name. Okay. We're going to give it a compartment, and please choose the demo compartment here, the one we created earlier. Okay. We're going to give it, oops, come on. We're going to give it an address block. Now, the default address block that it takes is 10.00/16. Now, please remember, this is a private address range, so it doesn't matter that you're all using the same address range. Okay. And we're also going to give it a public subnet range. Now, for some reason, they have chosen 10.020 there, and a private subnet range, and we're going to use the default of 10.010. Please also make sure that use DNS host names is checked. Okay. So once you have done that and you fill the screen in, so fill the form in rather, if you just click next, and it'll provide a summary of everything that it's going to do. Just check that the address names that it's created, that the address ranges and the CIDRs are correct. Now, notice there's an awful lot more on here than you just said. So in addition to creating the network, you can see it's going to create a public subnet. It's going to create a private subnet for us. It's going to create some gateways that would allow incoming and outgoing traffic, create some security lists, which provide the basic security controls, and some route tables that will send traffic to the appropriate gateway for outgoing requests. So if we just click the create button then, so this is going to show you what's happening. You can see this is actually pretty quick, okay? The VCN that is created is within a specific data center, or what we call a region. So in this case, it's within our Frankfurt region. Now, regions have either one or more than one data center. In a region where you have multiple data centers, you can create a subnet that will exist across all of those data centers. So that's how you can create resources or a network, for example, where you may have multiple compute instances that talk to each other, but they're in separate data centers. And the reasons for doing that are things like availability. So if one data center is damaged, let's say there's a flood, the other data centers can continue to work. And many of the network resources, for example, things like load balancers, are also automatically set up using that. So we're going to give it a second. If people can let me know when they have created their cloud network using the poll, please. Okay. So the individual who was asking about the identity stuff, thank you for providing the email address. I will get some stuff emailed to you after the event. Okay, So it looks like pretty much everybody has successfully created a VCN. Thank you very much for doing that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go and create some compute resources within that VCN. Okay. Now, if you click the View Virtual Cloud Network button, it'll show you that network, right? If you scroll down here, you will see all of the resources that have been created on the left-hand side. Now, we're going to come back to this screen in a minute because we're going to need to adjust the security lists, which will enable us to then provide access to our web browser. But for now, we're going to go and create a compute instance. Now, creating a compute instance, as you can see, I've just gone to that stage on the left-hand window here. We're going to basically go and create a virtual machine. Now, there are two types of compute instance within the OCI cloud. There is a bare metal compute instance, which is a physical server. It's normally something of the order of 50 OCPUs. It's very, very strong isolation. That is unique and owned by yourself. Nobody else is sharing it. However, for most tasks, that's overkill. Obviously, some people need the full size of set of compute there. Okay, so somebody has a question on group and user creation. So when you create a user or a group, these are effectively system-wide resources. So they're not tied to individual compartments. Okay, so the other type of compute resource is a virtual machine compute resource. This is effectively a virtual machine running on a bare metal server. Now, we do ensure that these are isolated. So even if two competing companies happens to have virtual machines on the same physical server, they are still completely isolated. So there's no risk, that you're going to have, bleeding of information and so on there. So let's go through a process of creating an instance. So if we go to the hamburger menu and go to compute and then click on instances. Okay. Please make sure that in your compartment, you have chosen demo as a compartment in the window on the left-hand side. Okay, right? And then click the Create Instance button. Now, we need to give it a name. Strictly speaking, by the way, these do not have to be unique names, but we would strongly recommend that they are to help you understand and manage what is going on here. Okay, so we're going to call this a web server instance. Okay. Make sure that the compartment is demo. Now, in the placement section here, you remember I said that some of our regions have multiple availability domains, some of them only have a single availability domain. In this particular case, I'm running in Frankfurt, which has multiple availability domains. So I need to track which availability domain I'm working in, because some resources are specific to the availability domain. And when we create a block volume in a minute, we need to know which availability domain to use. So please, where it says availability domain, in this case, it's running in availability domain 3, please take note of that, okay? If you wanted to, you can manually control that. So if you click the edit button, you could choose the availability domain. Generally speaking, unless you have a specific reason for separating it, it's best to just choose or take the one that the system has chosen, because that will help balance virtual machines across the entire environment. Now, image and shape lets you choose what your environment looks like. Now, again, for now, we're just going to take the default image and shape, but if we click the edit option here, under image, there's a whole bunch of images. Under shape, effectively, you can choose all sorts of different shapes, different sizes. One people use quite a lot in here is the flex shape, wherever that's gone. I can't spot that. Okay, so under the flex shape, which lets you choose and fine tune the number. So that's an AMD shape. Also, please notice on this list, though, we're not going to be using it today, but we do have ARM-based shapes here, okay? So I am just going to cancel that and stick with the shape that it chose, right? Which is a small AMD base, because that's all we're going to need for running our web server. Now, you can see that we've got SSH keys here. This is where we're going to make use of the SSH key we generated before. So if you go back to your OCI Cloud Shell, and if it has terminated, you're going to need to go back into the .ssh directory and have a look at the public key. Please copy and paste your public key. Vitally important. It needs to be your public key. It needs to start with the SSH and end with this bit that looks a little bit like an email address in my case. And then click where it says paste SSH keys and then paste that. Okay. Now, the reason we're doing it this way, we could have had the system generator key pair for us, but then when we downloaded it, it would be downloading onto your computer, not the Cloud Shell. The issue there is that different computers have different ways of running SSH and so on. Okay, so please paste your SSH public key into that box. Okay, and then we can basically click the Create Instance button. If you want to, you can control some other settings in terms of boot volume size and stuff like that. But for today, we're just going to click the Create Instance button. Okay. So once we have created that, we will start seeing our web server instance being created. There are several steps here. First of all, it starts provisioning it, which is effectively identifying a suitable server to run that virtual machine on, creating the instance on that server, creating a boot volume, and then it will start up and we'll see that the service will come along. So we're just going to give everybody a couple of minutes to complete that set of steps. Okay, so you can see now in my instance that my instance now has a running, is now the running state. So basically the operating system is booting up. So we'll give it a short while just for the operating system to complete its boot process. Okay, now unfortunately we don't have a poll that breaks this particular section into two parts. So we're going to go ahead with provisioning the web server, and we'll then, once we've done that, give you a few minutes just to make sure that works. So again, you can see in the left-hand window, which is the lab instructions window that we're following along, we're going to have a look at how we can connect to our instance. Why are we running a web server? Well, we probably want to run something, okay? You know, generally speaking, nobody runs a computer just because they want a computer. They want to do something with the computer. So first of all, we need to connect to the new instance that we have just created. Now, it is important here that you are in the .ssh directory. So if you are not in the .ssh directory, please do so. You can see here in the Cloud Shell, as part of the prompt, it will say the directory you're in. So in this case, you can see it's given 80 Graves my name. So that's a tenancy. And then it says :.ssh, all right? If it doesn't say .ssh, you probably want to cd into .ssh. Okay. Somebody has a question about fault domains and availability domains. A availability domain is a physically separate data center. I'm not sure exactly what the rules are, but they're certainly separated by several kilometers. The idea being that if some kind of disaster happens, like a complete major power failure that takes out one of the data centers, but the other data centers within a region will continue working. Now, obviously, not every region is a multi-availability domain region, however. Generally speaking, obviously, all of our data centers do have things like emergency power backup and so on. So power failure is a bit unusual, but you could see a situation where maybe there was a fire that took out an area that a data center was in. A fault domain is effectively a separate area within that data center. So it's going to be on its own power distribution, for example. And effectively what that means is that each of the data centers will have multiple power sources. So even if the entire data center isn't taken out, one of the fault domains may be affected, but the others shouldn't be, in terms of things like a power distribution board failure or a rack failure or something like that. Okay, so generally speaking, we will automatically balance stuff across fault domains and availability domains where they are. Every single one of our data centers has 3 fault domains. Okay, so all right, back to our web server. So so the question is a compute instance tied to a single availability domain? That's correct. A compute instance does run within a single availability domain, but you can have a network that spreads across multiple availability domains. Okay, so that helps you build highly available solutions. And for many of our services, for example, the Kubernetes service, where there are multiple fault domains, we will automatically build and provision across all of those availability domains for you and across the fault domains to provide the best and highest available solution. Right, so we need to connect to our compute instance. So this is, unfortunately, you can't quite copy and paste this command. So first of all, we need to work out the IP address of our compute instance. So your layout is going to be slightly different. I've obviously zoomed in on here to give us better view, but on the instance details, you will see a public IP address. Okay, so please copy that, and then you do SSH -i, the Cloud Shell key file name. Okay, so this, because we're in the .ssh directory, we can just use it directly. If you were in a separate directory, you'd use something like -i $home/.ssh/Cloud Shell key, right? And then we're logging in as the user, OPC, which stands for Oracle Public Cloud, and then that IP address. Okay, you will probably be asked about, this is an unknown key and authentication, but this is the first time you connected to it. So please type yes that you want to continue connecting. It will then add that to the list of known hosts so you don't get asked about that multiple times. And I have now connected to my compute instance. You can see at the bottom here, it says OPC web server. That's showing the environment I have logged in on. Let's now go and install the web server. So I'm going to basically just copy and paste the commands you can see in the lab here. So first of all, copy and paste the sudo yum install command. Okay. This is going to install a couple of other services that also support the web server. Yum is a really, really nice tool for doing things. You say what you want to achieve and it works out everything that's needed to get there. And it will automatically apply that where possible. So that makes life a lot easier. So it's going to take a moment. It's going to basically download several packages of software, and then we'll install them into our instance. Now, because we chose a pretty small instance in terms of the memory capacity, it's going to take a second. Access to the lab guide. Yes, the lab guide will be available for you. The link is in the chat. Today, I think, could you just repaste the link to the lab guide, please, so people have it for later reference? Thank you very much. So yes, that will be available permanently, right? So now Yum has finished installing and verifying all of the various packages that were needed to provide this. So we're going to start this. So again, I'm going to copy the commands to start the Apache instance from the lab instructions into our cloud environment. Okay, and then I'm going to check or run a configuration check on that to make sure it's all been done. Now, Linux, like OCI, will automatically set things up in the most secure manner possible. So it actually blocks, at least these versions of Linux are configured to automatically block access to all services except SSH. So we need to enable the firewall within our Linux environment to run those rules, or to have a rule that allows HTTP to be accessible. So let's just paste that. Okay. So that has effectively now set up and reloaded the firewall rules, allowing external HTTP requests within the Linux environment. And we'll have a look at how we do that within the OCI environment in a minute. And lastly, we're just going to give us a little bit of text that will set up the default response. So that's our default index.html. Now, I am going to go to the web page that we had here. So this is, remember, my instance. Your IP address will differ. Okay, so okay. And this is failing. Now, there is a reason that this is failing, okay? It's basically trying to make requests and it's not getting anywhere, right? The reason it's failing is because the OCI security environment will also block everything but except SSH by default. The only reason we do SSH is because you have to be able to do the login, to do the initial setup and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our cloud environment. We're going to go back to the virtual private network. So if we go to networking, virtual cloud networks, find our VCN and click on the name. And if you scroll down on the left-hand side, you will see security lists. Make sure you choose the default security list. Okay, because that's the one that's obviously the default. And we're going to add an ingress rule. So scroll down to where it says ingress rules and click add an ingress rule. Okay. So the settings, excuse me, the settings for this ingress rule are CIDR, basically an IP address range. So we're going to put 0.0.0.0/0. Basically, that means any IP address. Okay. We're going to use TCP/IP because that's the protocol that HTTP requests go over. The source is the port on the computer that generates the request. Now, this is effectively dynamically selected by that source computer. So it could be almost anything. But we're going to specify that the destination is for port 80. So effectively, we're now saying you are only allowed incoming requests to port 80. Well, that's what this rule will apply. So if we click add ingress rules, okay, it's now done that. If we go back to our gateway, oops, I just realized that I am working on an external proxy there. And if we go back there, okay, you can now see that the response we've got is, this is my web server running on OCI infrastructure. So our web server is now up and running. We have now set up security access. Now, obviously, this is for a web server. If you were running a different type of service, it would be on a different port. So you would be setting up different firewall rules within the Linux environment if you were using Linux. You can also use, for example, Windows or any other operating system you would choose to install that you have appropriate licenses for. And you would need to set up the firewall rules. So we're just going to give you a minute or two just to make sure that you can correctly access that one. Let me just choose the right poll here. Okay. So once you have successfully accessed and set up your instance and accessed the web page, please can you click create a complete service so that we know that you've achieved that. Okay, excellent. It looks like the vast majority of you have successfully accessed your web server running on the OCI cloud infrastructure and have got all of the network settings in place. Thank you. Okay, so we've now shown you how to create a compute instance and how to create a service running on that compute instance. But the instance we're using at the moment is only running effectively on its boot disk, which is unique to it. So quite often people want to use external storage because they want to have something that will persist beyond the life of that compute instance. Now, that lasts a long time. If you shut it down, it'll still preserve the boot disk and so on. But let's see how we can create a block volume. Now, please, before we do this, if you can go back to the compute instance, so do compute instances, and then under your web server instance, click that, and please make sure you noticed which availability domain it is in. Okay, so let's go and create that block volume. So what is a block volume? Basically, it acts like a disk, okay? It can be attached to a compute instance. You can move it from instance to instance. So although it's only attached to a single instance, it can be moved between them. And it can be easily backed up and replicated. Now, there are different types and different ways of doing this when they're attached to the computer. It can be an iSCSI, which is what you'd use for bare metal. But for virtual machines, which maybe don't have an iSCSI driver in the operating system, effectively we can do paravirtualization, which makes it look to that virtual machine as if it is a local physically attached disk. Now, very important here, block volumes are encrypted. All of the permanent storage is encrypted within OCI. We're using keys that are managed by Oracle. However, we could have created keys that are managed by yourself using the Key Vault service. Also, the block volume is a block. Okay, so it's not a file system. If we want to use it as a file system, we have to put a file system onto it. And we're actually going to be doing that today, right? It is a availability domain specific resource, however. Okay, so please make sure that you do this in the same availability domain. Okay, so hence why you need to choose, make sure you remember the availability of domain of your environment. So let's go through the instructions in the left-hand side of a window. Okay, so first of all, let's create a block volume. Okay, so we're going to click on storage and then block volumes. We're going to create a block volume. Now, again, please make sure that the compartment is the demo compartment that you created. So create a block volume. We're going to give it a name, BV demo. Create in the compartment demo and make sure that the availability domain is the one you chose. In my case, that was availability domain 3. If you're working in a single availability domain region, doesn't matter, you'll only get the default option there. Okay. We're going to choose the size and performance. Okay, so there's different types of performance that you can get. We're just going to take the default option. In some cases, for some hardware, you also have the ability for NVRAM being attached. And we're going to choose a backup policy, which is the gold backup policy, which is basically an incremental backup. Now, this is a block level incremental backup. Okay. We could, for example, also do things like automatically replicate the backups across region and so on. Okay. I say we're going to encrypt it using the Oracle management keys. So let's create the block volume. So this is a reasonably fast process. It should only take a minute or two. Oh, in fact, it's less than a minute. Performances are improved drastically on that. Okay, so there we have our block volume. And again, the layout of my window is a bit different because I've zoomed in to give you better visibility here. Okay, what we're going to do now is we've got storage, but we need to do something with it. You know, just having storage, it's nice, but what are you going to use it for? So we are going to do this via the compute instance approach. Effectively, we could do this either from the block volume or via the compute instance, but it's a little bit easier logically in our heads to go via the compute instance. So if I go to compute and then instances, okay, and we'll choose our instance. I say make sure that you are in the demo compartment. It should do that once you set it, but you might find it changes. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down here, and on the left-hand side, under resources, it's got this thing attached block volumes. If I click that, I can then attach a block volume. Okay, so generally speaking, you would let Oracle choose the best virtualization device. You can override that if you want to. Choose the volume that you just created from that list. Okay. Right. And we need to choose where it's going to be, the device itself is going to show up inside the compute instance. So at this point, we're just going to take the first one on the list, which is dev Oracle OCI Oracle VDB, right? And we're going to leave it as read write. Now, in certain situations, you can have a block volume that is shared across other instances, but you have to be really, really careful about that to make sure that the two instances coordinate what they're doing. So let's just click the attach button there. So what it's going to do is it's going to create the attachment for us. So if I click the attach, you can see that it says attaching there. Okay. It's going to take a moment just to complete that attach process. Okay, there we go. Now, on this list here, if you scroll to the right here, you will see 3 little dots, okay? Those give us access to quick menu commands. If I click those 3 little dots, you can see that one of the options is iSCSI commands and information, okay? We do not expect you to remember these commands. So you'll see quite often that we have things like this where it's like the ability to just click copy on an OCID or password. So this is a command. We can click here, and it will show us what we need to do inside our Linux machine. Okay. Now, we're going to copy those set of commands for connecting. Okay, and we're going to paste them into. Oops. Come on. I seem to have what done here. Oh, last thing. My Cloud Shell, my VPN session dropped, so I need to reconnect to the Cloud Shell. Hang on a second. Give me a moment while I just do this. Will that work? No. Okay, right. Okay, so give me a moment while I just go and reconnect my IP address. Right. Okay. You shouldn't have to do that because you are unlikely to be on a VPN that's just dropped. Okay, so let's go back in there. I'm now connected back to my computer instance. So let's have a look at the commands. So if I copy that and then paste them in here, okay, what that's just done is that's issued the iSCSI commands that will give us our file system. Now, just to be clear, all that's happened is that we have gained access to that. It's now mounted it inside our compute instance. So if we look at the devices tree, we can see that we have Oracle DVA, okay? But that's not a file system. Now, if, for example, there are certain things, maybe some of the database options, which will work on block volumes directly, but most people use file systems. So let's follow the commands here, and let's go and execute the commands here to create a file system using that environment. So creating file systems pretty quickly. We're going to create a directory to mount that file system on. There we go, that's just now finished. And lastly, we can then mount that file system onto the directory. So if I now look at the storage capacity being used by our compute environment, okay, we can see at the bottom here that we have that file system that we just talked about. Okay, so that is the process of creating a block volume, attaching a block volume to the compute instance, and in the case of Linux, the set of commands for importing that block volume. Now, if you are running Windows or a different operating system, there would be a different set of iSCSI commands that you would need to use to mount that file system. Okay, and in the case of Windows, for example, you may choose to make it a para-virtualized device, so it shows up as if it was a locally, physically attached disk. That's probably a little bit easier from a Windows perspective. Linux has built-in iSCSI support. Windows does, but I don't know what the commands are for Windows because, frankly, I'm a Mac user, he says. Okay, let's give you a couple of minutes to go through those commands, and then we're going to look at the last section of this lab, which is about object storage. So once you have finished the block volume, if you could just indicate that on the poll, that would be really useful so that we can understand where everybody is. Okay, excellent. Looks like pretty much everybody has finished creating a block volume. That's great to know. For those of you who haven't, do not worry. You will have access to this environment for another 30 days. Well, actually, you'll have access to the environment provided you keep using it forever. And, you know, obviously the lab instructions are going to be online as well. So, you know, don't feel that you have a problem if you haven't got to this point already. Okay, so what we're going to do now is the last in this section of the lab, which is around object storage. Now, there's a couple of ideas we need to bring into play around object storage. Firstly, buckets. So a bucket is basically what it says. A bucket contains objects, right? Effectively, you can create buckets based on the way you name things. So they can look like a type of directory, okay? Technically, they're not, but it kind of works like that, okay? And a bucket has a storage type. Now, this is probably the most important concept here. A bucket can be a standard storage type, and that means that you can access the data immediately at full performance speed. There is also a storage type called intermediate, which is slower performance. You can still access data immediately, but you don't get quite the same level of performance. Lastly, there is a type of storage called archive. Now, archive is effectively offline storage. So once you have written the object into the bucket, it gets written into a long-term storage environment, which is basically a tape system, okay? That means that when you want to access that data again, it can take a while to retrieve it. Now, we'll guarantee that it will take less than 4 hours. Why would you use archive storage? Well, in some cases, you may have, for example, a legal requirement to retain data over many, many years. you are unlikely to need it, perhaps. So the ability to put it into long-term storage, which is far, far cheaper, is a significant benefit. Right? Now, clearly, if this is something that is going to be used quickly and immediately, then you would put it into the standard tier. Okay. We also have the ability to automatically move data that is infrequently used between the standard tier and the intermediate tier. Now, you have security controls on buckets, so they can be a public bucket. People can see everything that's in it. And it could also be, for example, a private bucket that means you have to be either signed in with the right policies to access the bucket, or you can generate something called a pre-authenticated request, which we'll look at in a moment. Importantly, buckets, like many other services in OCI, can generate an event. What do we mean by an event? When you create an object in OCI, or delete it, or in certain cases change it, we can automatically notify registered listeners that something has happened. One good example of this is we have customers, or we have a customer that is writing, it's a job application company, and they write people's applications into an object storage bucket. Once that's been written, that then triggers an event to automatically start processing the results. Okay, and there's various types of processing that can be kicked off by events. In this case, they're using something called our serverless for our function service. Now, within a bucket, you have the object. Now, just to be clear, an object is not the same as a file in a file system. An object is basically something that you can copy down into your local environment to work with. So you don't get to play with it in the same way as you do a normal file. Okay. An object can have versions on it, and that's controlled when you set the bucket up. And like every other piece of static information, it is encrypted, and it can be encrypted via a key that you manage or a key that we manage on your behalf. We also have the idea of a pre-authenticated request. So it may be that you've got an object that you don't want to let people have access to unless they have already got a specific URL. Okay, so we're going to have a look at how to do that. One other point, if you have applications that are designed to use Amazon's simple storage service, the object storage service within OCI is compatible within that. Okay, let's go and have a look at what that works. So on the left-hand side of the screen, I've gone in the lab to that environment. Let's just go back here. I'm just going to shrink down the Cloud Shell, and I am going to close that environment. So if we go to storage, and then object storage and archive, and choose buckets. Okay. Right. So we've got to create our bucket that puts things in. Okay. So if I create the bucket, there we go. I can give it a name. As always, it's probably a good idea to give it a name that makes sense to you. Okay. You can choose a storage tier of standard or archive. Let's say archive, the data is written, but it can take up to 4 hours to retrieve it. Standard, it's available online instantly. You can choose whether you want auto tiering. So that will move between the standard tier and the intermediate tier. Object versioning, do you want to keep a history of all of the versions of an object? And do you want to emit object events, which will then let you handle further downstream automation? Okay. We're going to let Oracle manage the encryption keys in this case. Now, a bucket is part of the object storage service. The object storage service is slightly different from a block volume in that this is what's called a regional resource rather than specific to any given availability domain. So we actually internally replicate data and so on for you on that behalf to ensure that it meets standard requirements. Sorry, standard availability requirements. So we are going to download the file, simplefile.txt. Okay, so hopefully that has downloaded. Yep, there we go. Oops, wrong button there. Okay, let me just make sure that's downloaded on my environment. 1 second. Come on. Okay, right. I seem to have forgotten how to use Chrome. Oh, well. Okay, well, I'll use a different one. So we're going to go into our bucket name. And within this bucket, you can see, if you scroll down to the bottom, the object. So I am going to upload an object. I'm going to, if I want to, I could give it an image name. So we're just going to call this, I don't know, pictures. If I had multiple objects that I was uploading, it would automatically add those. I'm going to put it into the standard storage tier. And in this case, I'm just going to drag and drop the image that we have been sent by Mr. Joshi earlier. And I'm just going to click upload. Okay, so that's uploaded the object for me. Okay, and if I click close, you can see it says picture from iOS and stuff like that. It gives us some detail. Now, the bucket we created by default has a visibility of private. That means that nobody can access that object unless they are logged in as a user. Now, if they're logged in as a user, or if they have the ability to be logged in as a user, then you can go to view object details and you could, for example, get the URL path. Okay. So that would let you download it directly. However, if somebody isn't logged in, we need to create what's called a pre-authenticated request. Now, the pre-authenticated request will effectively embed a security key into the URL. Okay. And you have to have the URL including that security key to access it. If I go and click on the dots and then click where it says pre-authenticated request, oops, there we go. Right. So again, I can give a name to the request that we have just done. I could, if I wanted to, create the request on everything in the bucket or the specific object, or I could restrict it to objects with a certain prefix. Okay. In this case, I'm going to just restrict it to the object. So I'm going to create that pre-authenticated request. Now, it is vitally important that you copy this URL that it has generated. There is no way after the event to go and retrieve that URL. Okay. So let me just go back to my text edit so I can just put that in here just to make sure. Okay. So what I can do now is I'm just going to go to Chrome, which is not logged into the OCI Cloud. I'm going to paste that. And hey presto, we get a picture of our international man of mystery, Mr. Joshi. So we're going to give you a minute or two just to do that. Then we basically finish this lab. So for now, please complete the object storage upload. And with that, you will have completed not only the lab, but also a core understanding of the basic features of OCI. So again, as always, once you have completed that, if you could let us know through the poll, please. Okay, folks, it looks like the majority of you have successfully done that. I have to say I am incredibly impressed. The last time we ran this lab, which was an internal thing, so with people who should know what they're doing, it took substantially longer to get to this stage. We've actually finished a few minutes earlier than we expected. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to do a summary of what we've just learnt, and then Ettore, I think we can probably do a couple of minutes Q&A if people want to raise questions in the chat. We can try and answer those, and then we'll have a look at finishing it. So just to summarize, what we've been doing today is we've been looking at how to get started with the OCI environment. We've shown you how to create your tenancy, which is a step obviously you've mostly done, how to use the OCI Cloud Shell and what it's used for. We've shown you how to generate an SSH key to access the environment using the OCI Cloud Shell. Now, just to be clear, you don't have to do that in the OCI Cloud Shell. If, for example, you're running on Windows, plenty of tools on Windows to generate keys. PuTTY is a very well-known tool for doing that. In Linux and macOS, you do have the ability to generate those keys directly, and the Cloud Shell does run Linux. Okay? We've then looked at how to create compartments for separating resources, to create users who are people who can log in. And users have administrative rights based on the groups they're in and the policies that are assigned to those groups. We've looked at how to create a virtual cloud network that you can use to put your network-based resources on. Now, the compute instance, for example, that we saw earlier on is a network-based resource. And so therefore that we had access to in connecting to it and SSHing to it. We also looked at how to create a block volume that would enable you to add additional storage to an instance. And block volumes can exist on a single instance. In certain situations, you can have a block volume across multiple compute instances, but they are in availability domains, right? Block volumes can be cloned and replicated. So, you can set up your master image and then quickly copy and duplicate that if you want. And you can also have things like automatic backups across regions or availability domains. Lastly, we looked at how to use the object storage service, which is not a network-based resource. So this is what's called a region-based resource, which is why you didn't have to assign it to a VCN. So with that, that is the end of this lab. We're going to stay online until past. If you have questions, please ask them in the chat. We will try and answer questions through that. Ettore, I'm going to hand back to you at this point to do the wrap up.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you, team. Thank you, Sid, for your support. You had also people in the breakout. So here are a couple of links that I'm going to post also in chat. And you will get also with the thank you mail in the upcoming days with the link to the record of this session. So you have the lab guide, and then please also on the right, if you can share with us your feedback on this event. There is an open area where you can leave your comment and we can absolutely improve. I remind you that with the free tier account that you got today, you have the possibility to obviously work on other labs that we can provide to you. And on top of the 30 days of trial that are included with a bunch of credits, you have always free services. Don't forget this opportunity, because there is really a bunch of services that you can perform always free with unlimited time at the moment. And then this initiative, this hands-on lab, is behind the Modern App Dev Masterclass umbrella series. So you have the link to the next one that we are going to have. So the next one is on JSON, the 8th of July, and then we will have another one on Apex Low Code, the 22nd of July. The nice stuff, we created a digital badge for this one specifically. So if you want to have fun, you can access the quiz that we created that is based on the content that Tim was sharing with you today. And if you complete the quiz, you can get this digital badge, and you can use for your social media profiles or for your actually internal communication with your teams, and inform them that there is the possibility really to following this program to get all the latest that Oracle is committed to doing on the application development topic, and be a developer pioneer, okay, with us. Of course, you are already a developer, but probably not with us. The idea is that you increase the level of knowledge around Oracle Cloud Solution. And last but not least, again, the 5th of August event, Simplify Modern App Dev. Also in chat, there is the link if you want to register. And it's pretty all for me. So thank you so much. I don't know if there are questions in chat that you want to handle. Sid or Tim, are you getting something?
I've got one or two questions in the chat. Just one thing I would like, please do the feedback. It's really, really important to us to understand what people's views of these sessions are. In particular, for this session, where we've adopted a different presentation style, which has been sort of more of a live demo, live lab style, where you've been following along. This is a relatively new thing for us, so we'd appreciate your feedback on that compared to perhaps the more traditional labs where we presented for 10 minutes and then you've had 25 minutes by yourself. So we'd like to understand which one of those two you think works best and is most effective. Okay. Right, so regarding some of the questions in the labs. Okay, do changes in the security list ingress rules affect access to all VMs connected to a specific VCN? What is the proper way to open, for example, port 80 only to the web server, but not to other VMs in the infrastructure? Okay, so there's a couple of solutions here. One, you could set up a specific subnet that has all of your web servers on it. Okay, so that's certainly an option, and then you could set up a security rule that just relates to allowing port 80 for that specific subnet in the security list for that subnet. Okay, so that's option one. There is also a mechanism to effectively create a group of compute instances and then apply security rules to that group. Okay, so there's a couple of options there. Depends on which way it makes sense for you to fit that. Okay, so let's have a look. What else do we have? Right. Availability domains, regions, and fault domains. Okay, so I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier on. So the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure worldwide, we have, I think it's 39 regions. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. That are distributed worldwide. Some of those regions are what we call single availability domain regions. Some of our multiple availability domain regions. Okay, and the difference really is the number of data centers that deliver that region. Okay, a multi-AD region, and they tend to be at least one or two of those in every major geographic region. For example, Europe, America, Asia Pacific, and so on. A multi-AD region is effectively comprised of multiple physical data centers that are separated. From your perspective, from an administration perspective, those work the same. You don't see the fact that they're physically separated, you just see that they're free availability domains. And you can create networks that will cross multiple availability domains. Traffic between availability domains is effectively free to use. Okay, so you don't need to worry about paying ingress or egress charges for traffic between those domains. Okay, within regions, however, if you want to send traffic from one region to another, you do need to pay an egress charge on the network costs for each region. Okay, when it goes outside the region. Within each availability domain, i.e., within a physical data center, we have multiple fault domains. So we have 3 fault domains. And each fault domain is a physically separate set of racks on a physically separate power supply. So if, for example, one power supply failed, it would only take down that fault domain. It wouldn't take down the other fault domains. So I'm hoping that answers the question. Okay, yeah, so the compute instances. So where you create something that is effectively specific IP address based, like a compute instance, that compute instance exists within an availability domain, and its boot volume and its block volume are within the same domain. However, you can replicate those volumes into other availability domains if you choose. You could also replicate those into other regions for availability reasons. So that gives you a very quick HA type reboot restart scenario. Services like load balancers are across the entire AD. Okay. So hopefully that answers that one. Okay, let's see what else. Sid, did you have any other questions?
No, I think we've answered all of them.
Okay.
I think there was one question about free tier. So I think we've shared the link around free tier, as in you have access to computes and databases and monitoring and observability, as well as a Bastion host. So there's a lot of capabilities available for the always free tier. So please have a look and use it and enjoy developing.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so with that, I'm going to say well done to everybody for basically beating the Oracle employees. Oracle employees who are on here, well done for beating your fellow Oracle employees in terms of getting this done. I know this isn't a race, but thank you very much for doing that and helping us stick to our timings. If we have questions, we're going to be on here for another few minutes. If you have other questions, please feel free to raise them in the chat, and we will try and address those. Otherwise, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the last insight. Thank you all. See you hopefully 8th of July, but there is really a bunch of initiatives that you can join live and on demand. Of course, the live one give you the chance to have a conversation with our experts and get support on the labs. So I always prefer when you join us live for networking. We are still in a virtual environment. Stay safe and see you next time.